Welcome to the Technology Industry Consortium's February quarterly meeting. I'm Shauna Tice, Technology Industry Consortium Strategist with Future Ready Oregon and the HEC, and I'm pleased to see you all here today. While I've met many of you over the last few weeks, I look forward to meeting more of you over the next quarter. Today is my first opportunity to lead this group, and it's our first fully virtual consortium meeting. We have a full and important agenda ahead of us, centered on key developments in Oregon's technology workforce ecosystem. Today, we'll be diving into the Year 3 annual report findings, which will give us valuable insights into our progress in building an equitable technology workforce. We'll also explore how our workforce-ready grants are creating pathways into technology careers across the state. A significant portion of our discussion today will focus on the implementation of House Bill 3306. This legislation establishes requirements for the consortium to publish wage standards and occupational pathways, ensuring that our workforce programs provide both meaningful entry points and clear advancement opportunities. The bill requires us to publish wage data standards that vary by locality for skilled occupations within our sector. My colleague Ronan will lead us through the discussion, and we've planned for small virtual group discussions following his presentation. I want to note that one of our speakers, Kyle Thomas, the Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs, will be unable to join us. He'll join us at the next consortium meeting in May. Before I turn it over to our executive leadership team for their opening remarks, I want to thank you all for your continued commitment to building a resilient and inclusive technology workforce in Oregon. Your expertise and engagement are essential to this work. So with that, Dr. Skari and Venkat, I'm not sure if Skip is here yet. He had testimony this morning. But would Dr. Skari and Venkat, would you like to share any opening remarks?
I don't know if Lisa is here, but I'm happy to say hello to everybody. Good morning. My name is Venkat, and I recently retired from NVIDIA. I spent about 30 years in the technology industry, and I recently accepted to a position of the Vice Chair of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. And in addition to co-chairing this consortium, I'm also the chair of the STEM Investment Council. So I'm looking to bridge some of the issues that I see across these forums, particularly on the topic of STEM education. And in terms of updates, I just got back from a trip, so I'm a little jet lagged still, but I'm looking forward to the discussions today, particularly the discussions around the technology sector. So hoping to learn and participate in some future working groups that might be helpful for this consortium. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the introduction, Shauna.
Thank you, Venkat. I know that Dr. Skari was intending to attend today. Oh, she's here. Do you have any opening remarks?
Sure, and I don't know what's happening because I just got a message that said my video had been disabled. So I don't know what's going on, so I apologize right now. You're just looking at my black square. So I will try to figure out what's going on. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for being a minute or two late. Lisa Skari, president of Mountain Hood Community College, and hope everyone survived the atmospheric river we had just recently. Last night was interesting, but I'm happy to see blue sky. Just wanted to, since we last met, things at the college are exciting. I think like many of the community colleges, enrollments continue to be up, which we're excited about. We continue to see growth in our current technical ed areas. And just a kind of fun thing for us, you know, we launched our cybersecurity degree, bachelor's degree last fall. We were hoping for our first year to have enrollment around 15. We are double that. So continuing to see growth in that area and are looking to hire another full-time faculty member to address what we're anticipating to be even more growth than we anticipated. So looking forward to how this new degree can support one small piece of the technology world.
That's great news, and thank you for sharing, Dr. Scari. What I'd like to do is if each consortium member could please turn on their camera and introduce themselves and include their name, their title, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I don't know if there's order for this, but I'll go.
Okay, I was going to volunteer someone if someone didn't jump up immediately. Thank you.
So I'm Kevin Mackey. I'm a vice president for digital strategy and technology services at Oregon Health and Science University.
Hi, I'm Andrew McGough. I'm the executive director at Work Systems, the workforce board for Washington and Multnomah counties.
I'll go next just so we can pair it up. I'm Ashley Espinoza. I'm the executive director at Lane Workforce Partnership, which covers the county of Lane.
My name is Steve Woos. I am associate vice provost at Oregon State.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kyle Ritchie-Knoll, and I'm the Director of Education and Workforce Policy for the Oregon Business Council.
Good morning. I'm Amy Vandervliet. I'm the labor economist with the Oregon Employment Department.
Good morning. My name is Abdi Afcha. I'm Vice Provost for Research and Academic Affairs at Oregon Institute of Technology. I'm replacing President Naganathan, who could not be joining today.
Good morning, everybody. Jeff Rhodes. I'm a CTE content area specialist at the Oregon Department of Education for Information Communication Technologies.
Hi, I'm Cassie Hammelman, and I'm a VP of Human Resources at Synopsys, representing the industry.
Good morning, everybody. Melissa Evers, VP in the CTO's office at Intel.
Hi, this is Corinne Bouchard. I apologize, I can't join with camera. We have an electrician out of our house right now, and it's disrupting some stuff. But I manage talent acquisition at BiAmp, and so I'm representing the industry side as well.
Everybody, good to see everybody. Wade Hopkins, Executive Director, Northeast STEAM Coalition.
Good morning, everybody. This is Janelle Ives. I am the Director of Secondary Post-Secondary Transitions Team at the Oregon Department of Education.
Hi, I'm Faye. I'm the Director of Encode XP.
Hi everyone, Jeff Hampton with Business Oregon. I apologize. I'm getting an error message on my camera, but I'm a Regional Development Officer with Business Oregon. I serve the Portland metro area, and we'll see if we can get the camera issue resolved.
Deb, I saw that you just joined. Do you want to introduce yourself? There are a number of people experiencing technical issues this morning that rain and wind had effects on all of us, it sounds like.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deb Mumhill with Oregon STEM. I am driving in the gorge right now, torrential rain. And so I might be popping in and out as well, just depending on my cell reception. But glad to be here, and hello, everyone.
I wasn't checking off names, but it seems that that's everyone. If I've missed someone, you can jump in now. I don't think we have Skip yet, so I guess we'll proceed, and he'll join us as soon as he is able to. Ronan, can you confirm that we have a quorum?
Indeed, we do.
Okay, great. So you should have all received the October meeting minutes in an email last week. I'd like to give you just a few moments to review them, and then I'm going to ask if there's consensus once you're ready. So I'll give you just a few seconds here. Okay, are there any amendments? If not, is there a consortium member who is willing to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I can make a motion to approve. This is Cassie Hamilton.
Thank you. And then could the rest of you type your agreement or share your agreement by typing yes in the chat? Terrific, thank you. Ronan has, do we have any public comment?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Okay, we'll go forward with the agenda as planned then. Thank you all for getting that business out of the way. So first up, let me make sure we have Amy Cox here today. Amy, have you joined us?
I have. I'm moving locations in the house, so I'll be camera on in just a moment.
Okay, that's terrific. We're a little bit ahead of schedule.
And Shauna, I'm here to kick us off if you want to go ahead and move into this agenda item. I think
Okay.
I've got the first couple slides.
Okay, so let's do that. So next we'll hear from, or first we'll hear from Amy Cox, the Director of the Office of Research here at the HEC, and Jennifer Purcell, whom you all know, the Director of Future Ready Oregon. They will present the Year 3 Future Ready Oregon report. And following that, Sarah Shin, the Workforce Ready Grant Administrator in Future Ready Oregon, who focuses on the tech workforce. She'll join Jennifer for a report of the Workforce Ready grants. Thank you. And Jennifer, you may kick it off if you'd like.
Great, thanks, Shauna. Ronan, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to begin today by reviewing a bit of what Future Ready Oregon set out to accomplish and highlighting what we learned through the investments. And then, as Shauna mentioned, my colleague, Amy Cox, the Director of HEC's Office of Research and Data, will provide a presentation on the Future Ready Oregon Year 3 annual report. That will include data about participation, services received, and early employment outcomes. And then we'll get to dive into the technology-specific grants with a little more detail. So a little bit about what Future Ready Oregon set out to accomplish. As a reminder, Future Ready Oregon is a $200 million package of investments that work together to advance a more equitable workforce system and to increase opportunities for diverse workers by centering the needs of historically underserved and underrepresented individuals and communities, and by focusing on key sectors of our economy. In 2022, the legislature made this historic investment in workforce education and training, and that included a range of programs that are designed to work together and emphasize alignment across the education and training ecosystem in Oregon. The legislature and the Racial Justice Council charged Future Ready Oregon with implementing and administering a number of programs that were intended to approach workforce and talent development differently, acknowledging that a one-size-fits-all approach was not sufficiently expanding our labor force, not adequately meeting our workforce needs, and not serving the diverse needs of communities across Oregon. And to date, all Future Ready Oregon funding has been obligated through both grant funding and strategic initiatives that aim to grow and diversify Oregon's workforce, close gaps in educational attainment and employment, and to strengthen Oregon's economic competitiveness. Innovative approaches to education and training were intended to inform future workforce and talent development investments by identifying promising practices and replicable and scalable strategies. And so on our next slide is a bit of a summary of what Future Ready Oregon is teaching us. Specifically, in order to increase opportunities for diverse workers, programs and policies must center the needs of historically underserved and underrepresented communities, ensuring that education and training is responsive to the needs of learners. And focusing on key sectors of our economy is providing for sector strategies that address critical workforce shortages and strategic workforce opportunities, strengthening Oregon's economic competitiveness. Partnerships are at the heart of this work, ensuring that community, education, and industry are working collaboratively towards a common goal, advancing a more equitable workforce ecosystem by addressing barriers to equitable participation in both education and employment, and ensuring that education and training also meets the needs of employers. And flexible funding that considers systems capacity and student supports is critical to coupling education and training with comprehensive wraparound services. These are so important to meet the basic needs of students and ensure that students and training participants have the resources that they need to be successful. Now I'll turn it over to Amy, who again will review the highlights from the Year 3 report and some of the early impacts and outcomes of these investments. I do want to pause briefly. Ronan, I know we were running a little bit ahead of schedule. We're now a bit closer to 9:20. Have we had any registration for public comment, just so we can double check?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thanks for affirming. Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. I apologize a little bit for my voice this morning. All the wind yesterday has sort of blown up my allergies, so bear with me. Excuse me. For the record, my name is Amy Cox, and I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Data at the HEC. And it is our office's responsibility to submit an annual report on the process, the progress, and the impacts of Future Ready Oregon every year to the legislature. This includes the parts of Future Ready Oregon that Jennifer and her team oversee, as well as the parts of Future Ready Oregon that are overseen in other parts of the state by the Bureau of Labor and Industries for apprenticeships and by Youth Development Oregon for youth investments. This is the third annual report, as you can see on the slide. And as Jennifer mentioned, it is the first release of initial employment outcomes for participants in Future Ready Oregon, which are a very important indicator of some of the outcomes that we're starting to see. So next slide, please. This year's report, as she said, I will not go through all of this slide, but depends on a variety of sources of data to ask several different questions. Who has been served to date? What kinds of services have they received to date? What are their employment outcomes, as I said? How the different 8 programs or 8 arms of Future Ready Oregon have progressed, and how all of this compares to Oregon's economic and educational landscape. We pay particular attention to the 10 priority populations identified in the legislation. They're located there at the lower right. And we rely on not only participant data on participants and services that the organizations who have received Future Ready Oregon funding collect and submit to us. Also, we rely on a variety of other sources of information, both within the agency, educational records, as well as outside of the agency. Next slide, please. Overall, the third year outcomes that we put together in this report across all 8 arms, so taking the $200 million investment as a whole package, have been positive. This is a good news story. We have seen over 14,000 participants served. This runs through June 30th of last year. The report went to the legislature in December. So over 14,000 participants served to date, virtually all of whom are from a low-income community. So essentially all Future Ready Oregon participants coming to the table already representing that priority population. Above and beyond low income, we among those who reported all of their characteristics, we see that 92% of the participants represent or identify with another priority population as well. Taken together, this is a group that clearly is more diverse in a number of ways than the labor force, which is one of the goals, right? To have not only labor force expansion, but to have equitable labor force expansion. Grantees reported that 45,000 services were provided to date. In other words, on average, about 3 services per participant. So most participants, not sort of one and done, but receiving multiple supports. Those range from workforce training services and other kinds of workforce development to support services like tuition and fee remission was the most common support service offered, as well as things like food and housing support, financial support, I should say, and as well as materials needed for jobs or transportation support or childcare. Among these bottom 3 boxes are sort of the high, all of this is a high level finding. It's a very set of findings. It's a very dense report, but at the bottom here are really the 3 takeaways around employment outcomes. For participants who were not employed, excuse me, when they began services, at the point where they ended services, about 2/3 of them were employed. So in other words, they went from no employment to services to employment. And among, again, among those participants who were not employed prior to services, so some participants began participation in the Future Ready Oregon services unemployed, about 2/3 of them employed after services. For those who were employed at the start, we look at their wages, and we found that we saw wage gains on average for those. On average, the hourly wage for those participants who began their services already employed was a $3 an hour bump. That's notable. That's a significant increase. And then for all of them, whether or not they were employed prior or not, we also looked at what, industries they were employed in after services. And what we saw is that we cannot identify technology industries in the same way as we can healthcare and manufacturing. Of course, technology spreads across multiple industries. But for healthcare and manufacturing, the other 2 focus industries, almost half of the participants were employed in those sectors. So again, another good news story here, that obviously much higher than the percentage of Oregonians employed in healthcare and manufacturing in general. There is this call out box here that I will return to later, but I want to call your attention to, and that all of these employment outcomes are dependent on whether or not we have participants' Social Security numbers. That is the way that we're able to match the participant data to the earnings data, the wages data from the Oregon Employment Department. So administrative records for employment that all businesses have to submit. And essentially, if we don't have that Social Security number, we don't know your outcome, your employment outcome. There is definitely work that we have been doing and continue to do with grantees to support them in collecting those Social Security numbers. We are missing Social Security numbers for a number of participants, and that varies across the different programs. That work is ongoing, but it is a caveat. We're confident in the results you see here, but I would say that we need more Social Security numbers to be able to track employment outcomes in growing ways. So next slide, please. Thank you. This gives some very high-level findings for each of those 8 programs. I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but I want to call out a few things. One is that there are positive outcomes that we have seen across these groups, across these different programs. You'll see Industry Consortia down at the lower right. You know that work. I want to also call out that, again, these findings are through June of 2024. There are a number of programs, in particular the Workforce Ready grants, that had infrastructure investments. In other words, we're not serving quite as many participants in the early grants as they are in later grants. So we do anticipate the number of participants to continue to rise pretty substantially across some of these programs. Other programs, funding concluded by this time, so we will continue to track outcomes for youth programs, for registered apprenticeships, for credit for prior learning, for career pathways. We'll continue to track the employment outcomes for those shorter duration programs, but we don't anticipate the number of participants to continue to rise for those. Lastly, I want to call out Prosperity 10,000 here, the very first program. It's the only one of these 8 that has numeric goals folded into it in the legislation. That's why it's written a little bit differently here in these high-level findings. The takeaway of those goals is that it is absolutely meeting the mark, hitting the mark on those goals. The legislation in under discussion right now may remove those goals, but at the most we have that they're meeting the goals that were put in front of them. We do see the little asterisks do refer to the fact that some programs have this lower Social Security number reporting. So the employment outcomes for those programs, we are a little more cautious about. They're not quite as generalizable as the ones that don't have an asterisk. But by and large, we are seeing not only continued progress and steady work toward the process and the implementation of putting these programs into action, as well as a growing body of positive employment outcomes. Next slide, please. This is some focus answers or findings for technology sector work. I want to point out that some of these things we are, because of the way technology is spread across virtually all industries, there are some slightly different definitional pieces here, but which we can get into if you have questions. But in general, the point that we have made here on this slide and that we make in that economic landscape section of the report is the continued need, high need for technology workers. And we have many of the positions in the technology sector or technology related occupations being hard to fill, requiring some sort of post-secondary training. In other words, like could be offered through Future Ready Oregon Services, paying substantial amounts, and that demand going nowhere but up. So continuing to sort of see the need for prioritizing the technology sector in training and in employment after training. This is not news to any of you, I'm sure, but we do want to illustrate to you that this is a piece of what's in the report as well. Next slide, please. This slide is a little different. It's not about the economic landscape of Oregon. It's again back focused on the participants and the services that they're receiving. You'll see what's on the left is the percentage of participants who were in, or not the percentage, excuse me, the number of participants in particular topic-focused workforce development trainings. Not all workforce development is focused on a particular career field or a particular topic. Some of it is about resume writing or general workforce development. But for the services that do have that topic-focused training associated, we found, you'll see 256 of those participants were in computer and information sciences, another 89 in technology, education, and industrial. Of course, there's technology related to the others. I don't mean to imply that there's not, but I think the takeaway here is that it's not a large chunk of the pie. The slices devoted explicitly to technology-related training are relatively narrow, especially when we compare them to that high need for technology workers. So really good news to hear at the start of the hour about the successful launching of the cybersecurity program. Just want to acknowledge that. The credentials earned on the right-hand side come when we match that participant data with other educational data in our office. And here we see that there are technology and computer-related credentials being awarded among these early participants who have already earned a credential, 79 out of the total there. We will continue to track that. I wouldn't be too I wouldn't overgeneralize from that narrow blue slice on the right yet. The educational outcome data is still pretty early for Future Ready Oregon participants, but it is something we will continue to be looking at in the coming years. Next slide, please. This is the way that this slide returns to a very early slide that we presented as we planned out this multi-year evaluation. And looking at the statute and the designs and intent of the statute, we have framed this multi-year evaluation around two very sort of overarching questions. Does the Future Ready Oregon investment lead to greater economic security? And that's not only for individuals, but also for businesses and the states in meeting labor shortage needs, for example. And does it lead to greater equity? Looking in particular at the 10 priority populations in the legislation. And in prior years' reports, in the first 2 years of reports, we did not really return to these questions yet, but at this point we've accumulated enough findings to be able to begin to answer these questions. This is initial stages. It's a multi-year evaluation. We will continue to report on Future Ready Oregon outcomes even after all of the funding has been fully not just allocated, but expended. And what we're seeing in this year is, yes, we are seeing Future Ready Oregon leading to greater economic security in year 3, by year 3, and greater equity. And that comes from these findings that I've referenced, but really looking across each individual program and each individual priority population and the findings as a whole. So we not only see these positive employment outcomes, we also see them across every priority population. We see them across all of the different 8 programs. We see strong representation of priority populations, not just representation, but really high representation. These are very positive outcomes. And and they're based, this is sort of sometimes hard to present this report because it's based on just really copious amounts of data. This is quite a high level finding, but we're seeing such consistency that we're comfortable beginning to answer this question. So next slide, please. So we put together also 4 overarching findings and recommendations in addition to beginning to address those 2 big key questions. The first finding is is really a keep doing what you've doing kind of finding in terms of the community engagement. We have done close tracking of the implementation, the way these programs have been put into practice across the different investment arms. And one of the things that we have seen every year is intentional and repeated community engagement. It is different than the way many grantees have done business to date. They have partnered with new organizations. They have reached out to new communities. They have tried to maintain that partnership. We do believe that that is definitely why there is such high priority population representation among the participants. And we don't want that to stop because of the focus on the priority populations. So this is very much a keep doing that community engagement. Don't sort of stop just because it's harder to see. Is that bearing fruit? Yes, we do believe it is. The second finding is that this is the one portion of the priority populations that we did not see well represented among Future Ready Oregon participants, and that is Oregonians who are 40 and older. One of the priority populations is individuals who may face discrimination in employment, may be more likely to, on the basis of age. That includes both younger and older Oregonians. And what we have seen is that younger Oregonians are well represented, older Oregonians are not. And so we have a recommendation there to the grantees to, as possible, increase their engagement with communities and individuals who are 40 and older. Next slide, please. The third overarching finding is that has to do with that Social Security number data collection. We have shown the employment outcomes in this year's report, but to be able to really have fully generalizable findings across in each program, to be able to track those outcomes, not only in the near term, but in the long term, we really need more Social Security number reporting. We also need more reporting on which training services are associated with a particular topic. We believe there's some underreporting around that as well. And we want to make sure we capture all of the technology-related training, for example. So this is work that we have done with grantees and will continue to do. It can be difficult. I want to acknowledge nobody wants to just turn over their Social Security number. In a day and age of identity breaches, without, assurance and understanding about why that would even be needed and what would be done with my Social Security number when I give it to you and all of that kind of thing. So this is, but this is something that's just really essential for really understanding the impact of the program. And then the last finding is not so much a concern as we want to make sure we draw attention because of the time limited duration of this funding. We don't want to wait till the end and look back and say, oh, maybe we've focused so much on upskilling, we forgot to focus on bringing new folks into the labor market. We don't know that that's the case yet, but we want to make sure in the coming year, grantees are focused not only on upskilling folks who are already employed, but on bringing new people into the labor market as well. Because that expansion of the labor market, that expansion of workers, I should say the labor force, excuse me, that expansion of the labor force, raising the number of Oregonians who are employed is essential to being able to meet these labor shortages that the state is facing. And so we call particular attention to that group, those who have not been employed for some time, in this last recommendation. I know I've sort of gone through a lot in these last several slides, but I wanted to make sure that we could hit all of the main highlights, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Wade, do you want to ask your question of Amy? You said, or I would love to hear more about this. I didn't notice at what point in the conversation you added that comment. So do you have a question for Amy?
No, it was in response to her statement about CBOs, not so much. It's just kind of just interested to hear like what would that
That
be.
was Ashley.
Yeah, that was for Ashley. But in terms of this, what's our lens here? Like, was there doubt that this would have produced results? So I see some expected results that were produced as expected. Are we looking at cost per whatever? That's sort of one. I'm not sure what. I mean, yay, good news to see the results. They're not guaranteed. Second would be, is there, if we're looking at credential attainment, was that material to employers? Did it adversely affect the employment rates? So like, is it actually not necessary? And or what are is there feedback from, it'd just be interesting to have information from the people that are trying to get participants through those credentials. What's happening? Is it just like, I don't want to study, or are there just is there still some unmanaged risk with mismatch between the participants and the credential?
So let me take your first question first. Was there concern about the investment not being not leading to positive outcomes such as this? I think some of that depends on who you ask that question of. I think certainly our legislators range and in their expectations for this. I will say that the fact that we have seen positive outcomes, not just in general, and this is an in general presentation, but across groups and across programs is actually a really important thing to emphasize. So I think more often we see positive outcomes for some groups. And so that is one thing I would say there. And in terms of credential attainment, I'm not sure if I fully understand your question. Are you asking, is there, are we expecting more credential attainment, or is there a disconnect between where people's credentials are being, what people's credentials are being earned in compared to where the labor market needs are, or?
Yeah, well, it's sort of that. So you saw 19% was what I think the number I saw, but then you still saw 67% or so, programs being completed successfully, transitioning to employment. But it just sort of begs the question of like, what's happening with credential attainment, having taught in a credential attainment context. I have some ideas, but I just wondered what the broader swath of, I haven't taught in a like a healthcare credential attainment, or, so it just sort of like, that seems to be the piece where I just wonder if still the activity is fitting the target population very well.
Well, this is a really good question. And I think some of the distinction here is between employment and upskilling, right? So that 65% of participants who were not employed prior being employed after services includes everyone. And if you were not employed prior, it may have been because you were finishing a credential. It may have been because you were not connected to employment in the labor force in a consistent way, or in an occupation that led to some sort of consistency. And so, there are sort of so many steps along the process. So I think we don't know yet because we are still building that database of Social Security numbers of people who have completed services, who could have gone into credential programs and then completed them, right? So that is a question we will continue to unpack in the coming year, but don't quite have yet. But I think key to it is how many and who is in what point of that process, that upward mobility process.
And I just want to jump in, Amy, also. I think Ashley's comment was about the data collection for the different organizations and the capacity of CBOs, and you mentioned the local workforce boards. Wade, just to build on your question, as a reminder, you saw the slide with the 8 programs that were embedded in Future Ready Oregon, and the intention around that was very specific to invest in existing infrastructure and existing partnerships like with the local workforce boards, community colleges, universities, and to do things differently and to expand the partners that comprise the workforce system and invest in community-based and culturally specific organizations that are providing workforce services and ensuring that that ecosystem alignment is built upon. And so those initial investments really were intended to do 2 things: to utilize the existing partnerships and infrastructure to make some immediate gains for historically underrepresented individuals who in this case are identified as priority populations, and to expand the partners that comprise the workforce system and their capacity to actually engage with the work and support individuals. And so it was a both and as Amy indicated, as we've been collecting data over time, and organizations who really needed to build capacity began serving participants a bit later in the trajectory of the Future Ready Oregon investments, and that was really by design.
May I respond just because I put that comment in there? So yes, and we here locally, we've been working hard as a workforce board to get out to our, organizations. And I'll just give you guys an example because I don't want to like make things up. Like I want to give you a true example. So the NAACP here in Lane County, and if you think about the spread of Oregon, right? Like you got Portland metro area, and then you got Eugene and Springfield. Like that's a big spread. So the NAACP in Lane County is very different than the NAACP in Portland, right? And so when they got their contracts, they came to us because there were stipulations within the contract to be able to be executed. For example, vulnerable populations and endorsement of insurance. Nobody knew what that was. And so Tiffany, that's my chief operating officer, is a brilliant genius and was able to kind of figure out what that looks like, because workforce boards, not only are we answering to the state, but we have to answer to the federal government too. So, and she's been in this business for like 35 years. So, we've been really having to support our community-based organizations. Let me add one more thing about the NAACP because it blew my mind. When I was in a meeting, the girl that was doing the contract is going to med school full-time. She's working part-time and does not have any other help to do the work other than basing it on volunteers. So that also creates a lot of, it's like a mirage almost. And so we thankfully work really closely in Lane County. We have a community collaborative and all these cool ways to connect. And so we've really leaned in to just say, you are us and we are you, and we're going to figure this out together. And so I just wanted to add that because yes, Jennifer, all of those things, and administratively very tough on smaller community-based organizations.
No, I appreciate that, Ashley. That partnership alignment is so critical, and the idea of partners coming together around their unique strengths, right? We're so much more effective than the sum of our parts. So thanks for sharing those examples. Amy, I heard you, and then I do see Melissa and Lisa have hands up.
I want to just sort of bring that back to the report, which is that then it's a really great illustration, and thank you, Ashley. It's a really great illustration about why this is a multi-year report and why this is the 3rd year and it is still partway through, because those relationships take time to build and put into effect. So it's just a really good illustration of why we say things in the report about this is partway through, this is interim. And I say that because I recognize that I wish miracles could happen in less than 2 years too. It can be dissatisfying to read something and say, well, but what's the answer? Like, well, the answer is still unfolding, is really it. And I think Melissa was next, I think, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. So I was just going to ask, in the beginning of your presentation, you had some statistics with regard to measured outcomes. And I was wondering if there were specific goals that were established when this work was commenced, and how are we executing against goal? Are these good? Are these not good? Like, similar to Wade's question.
It's a great question. I want to acknowledge it's a great question. It is a tough question. The short-term answer is no. There were not specific goals set in the legislation for the investment as a whole. Only the Prosperity 10,000 program had any numeric goals, and it is well meeting those at this point. But the question of how good is this good? Like, you said it was good. How do you know it's good? Is a very good one and a difficult one. And that is because the design of Future Ready Oregon was to do things differently, to reach communities differently, and in greater ways, to connect, in this case of the consortium, education, workforce training, business, labor, community, in new ways, to expand capacity as well as reach individuals. And because of all of those things, a comparison group or a comparison program is hard to come by. Now, that said, I would say, doesn't mean that we don't look and we don't try. And I would say that compared to, I guess I would say two things. And we lay this first piece out in the report. There have been some pretty in-depth analyses of smaller, more focused workforce training investments, workforce development investments that are similar in other parts of the country, but not as large statewide as Future Ready Oregon is. And they have shown very strong outcomes in terms of for those analyses. So that's one piece. The other piece is employment outcomes in the vein that we have seen of about 2/3 of participants employed in the quarter after, about wage gains are comparable to other workforce investments that are less focused on reaching underserved and underrepresented communities. So to be able to have comparable, it's a little early to say this, so it's not in the report yet, but this is how we are looking at it. To be able to have comparable outcomes with communities who have been less served and are less connected, I would argue and have in front of the legislature that this is a positive set of findings. President Scari?
Yeah, so I know one of your findings was related to we need to do a better job collecting Social Security numbers. And in looking at the groups or the percentages, I concerned that we might need to try to figure out some other way of measuring, because I think in the current climate, folks are going to be less open to sharing that information because they don't know what it's going to be used for. And so I know this is all emerging and we're all trying to deal with it, but I don't know if there's any conversations or other ways we're thinking about how we might be able to get some of this information.
President Scari, I could have paid you. I did not pay her. She's not a plant. It is something very high on our mind. We are talking internally within research and data, and then after that with Future Ready Oregon staff, although also now, and with our diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists in our agency about what we can do to support grantees and to support participants. We do everything we can, and the employment department has been enormously helpful in doing everything they can to try and match participants when we don't have Social Security numbers. That is work that will continue. The fact of the matter is, not only Social Security number, but also priority population identity is another really important piece of data that we need to be able to see what the reach of this program has been. That need sitting in the context of growing concern in many of those communities about government protections. And we are the government, right? Even if it's a community-based organization that is the grantee, the fact is those data are going to the state. So we are very aware of that. I will tell all of you, and we have trauma-informed data collection trainings and materials that we work with the grantees to provide. We will continue those and expand them, no doubt. But the data are highly secure. I do not have concerns around that at all. I will say that for data collection, Future Ready Oregon has had us in our office doing things differently as well. And it's really, we are not in a position to collect data directly from individual Oregonians. We rely on our external partners who are serving those Oregonians to collect the data. But we have never led that work in a trauma-informed way, the way we have for this. And that is a process improvement that we'll continue to undertake as well. So I don't have a great silver bullet to offer you, but I thank you for your comment because it is high on all of our minds. Yes. Ashley, I think is the only hand I see.
Yeah. Oh, I so much appreciate your comment. Something that we've been talking about, because I mean, we have been grappling with that as well here locally, because we do hear people like trying to understand, like, how do we know if this is good or bad? Like, what do we try to do? And knowing that in 24 months, and I apologize for saying like a miracle, but really like thinking about partners that are trying to work together, that their systems don't talk together, and contract and administrative and all those things. And so one thing that our team has been talking about in our board is around business satisfaction. So if businesses are getting what they need through sector strategies, then in our head it's like, well, then maybe you are hitting the people that you need to get to work for your business, right? And so it's like, maybe it's not so much focusing on the workforce and asking them for so much information. It's like, are they getting the workforce that they need? And then they'll then be able to respond of who's working for them. And being in a state that's income tax state, like maybe that is how the data shows if the needle is moving or not, is through business engagement and satisfaction, and that people are actually getting connected to those jobs. And so in the interim, that's all I'm saying, in the interim of trying to figure that out, because like for, let's say, like a refugee community could look different than, let's say, someone that hasn't had their documentation for a long time because they've been on the unhoused for 20 years. Like that can look really different for folks. And so I would just hate for us to wait for us to figure that magic bullet out, than thinking like, can we lean into business? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is fulfill that need. Again, just ideas we're talking about, just ideas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It undoubtedly has to be a multi-measure approach, undoubtedly, right? And I also want to call attention to what Andrew just put in the chat. Thank you, Ashley and Andrew, for lending sort of multiple layers to this. And that is that, yes, we have seen this happen time and again. As the relationships are built, data collection actually is possible in different ways, right? I also want to express just a couple things about the report. What I put in front of you was largely quantitative in terms of the findings. There are hundreds, literally, of pages of quantitative results in the report, especially in appendices. Those are there by design and by statute in order to be able to answer some of the particular questions that people have. Well, what about this priority population? Well, what about this? What about this program, or what about this region of the state, or that kind of thing? In addition, it is there is a lot of other information in the report. It is, as I said, a dense report. But we are hopeful that by making it that way, we're not only responding to the requirements in the legislation for what has to be included, but we're also providing information that you all, grantees, but really industry consortia in particular can find useful in charting the course forward that you are making. I don't just mean the section on the industry consortia. I really mean on how we can meet those needs of business, how we can use this investment to raise the economic well-being for the state.
Thanks so much, Amy. I think there's a lull in questions. We'll go ahead and move into the overview of the Workforce Ready grants specific to the technology sector. And then we should continue to have a little bit more time for questions and discussion. This has been great. I am joined by Sarah Shin, who is the Workforce Ready Grant Administrator for primarily for the technology portfolio. Deb, I see your hand up. Did you want me to pause?
Yeah, I'm sorry that my call dropped 3 times around Multnomah
Oh,
Falls.
no.
So, yeah, but quick question for Amy while we have her, if I can,
Yeah,
if I may.
you bet.
Excellent report, Amy. Always love your data and just the way that you present it. My question, and it goes back to Wade's question early on about credentials and attainment and barriers. I don't know if we have this data, or maybe we can think about how we can start to collect data going forward. But it took me back to 15 years ago working with IBEW, which is the International Brothers Electrical Workers Union. And they informed me when I was running the robotics programs that only 25% of applicants could pass their basic math test. So instead of thinking about wraparound services to help them bring up their math acuity, back then they were just thinking, let's try to recruit as many kids who built robots in high schools into the IBEW apprenticeship as we can. So anyway, just when Wade asked about barriers to credentials and maybe do we have any information of what was keeping people from completing credentials, I just wanted to plant that math question that just plagues our state as a true barrier, to the point where the Dean of the Sciences of OSU recently has done some research and said when they looked at why students were changing from math or science majors to like maybe the College of Business, and some of those were pre-nursing, pre-med, it was the math of chemistry that was rooting them out. So just wanted to lay that question out there.
Deb, I want to thank you for that. And I will share with you, first of all, my wholehearted support of math being a barrier for many career fields, in particular technology industry and technology focused careers. Even if that career doesn't require deep amounts of math, it sounds like it might, and that enough can be a barrier. When we're talking about reaching Oregonians who are not connected to the labor force, or who are connected, or who are older, we are talking about the math that they experienced in K-12, sometimes decades ago, sometimes a few years ago. And our K-12 partners work hard. This is not about that. Our K-12 partners work hard. This is not about that. What it is about is that we aren't teaching our children math to the degrees that they need it to succeed later. They're not learning it to the degrees that they need it later. A statistic that I used to quote before the pandemic, the data haven't been updated since the pandemic because statutory requirements changed and all that kind of stuff. But prior to the pandemic, 1/3 of 11th graders had passed the state's math assessment that was required for high school graduation at that point.
Correct.
Now, yes, maybe some of them would pass it undoubtedly in their senior year. This was 11th grade. Nonetheless, 1/3. Now, I've tutored many people in math. I've never met anyone who can't learn math, not ever. And it is potentially a very important barrier. So I know STEM is a focus in this consortium. It is that math barrier is not in the report. I will say other work that we have done in our office does definitely support that it can be a barrier.
Thank you. Yeah, and maybe as you work with grantees, if there's, I don't know what the survey questions of their participants include, but to start to identify some of those barriers. And I love what you said, Amy, that we can teach math, that we can understand where the gaps are and go back in their learning. There's lots of great AI tools that do that now. That would be part of possibly, instead of losing people or participants, that we could have a strategy, or the grantees could have tools or resource strategies to bring those people up to speed to make sure that they're successful in meeting those credentials. So thank you. I know you're a math champion and you're always in that corner, so appreciate your work in that space.
Thanks, Deb. All right. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. You should have in your meeting materials a couple of things for this agenda item, the slides that we're going to present, as well as a table of the technology-related workforce ready grants that have been awarded. Next slide, please, Ronan. Great. So we talked a little bit about the 8 different programs that comprise Future Ready Oregon and how they're designed to work together really to advance alignment across the education and training ecosystem. And Future Ready Oregon really represents a fundamental shift in how we deliver education and training to meet the needs of individuals and employers. Traditionally, an individual would be on the outside of the system trying to identify the appropriate entry point and relevant services, where Future Ready Oregon, as an ecosystem approach, encourages education, industry, and community partners to be aligned and responsive to the needs of learners and workers. We have a unique opportunity to leverage these assets and improve coordination across post-secondary education and the public workforce system. We've heard some really extraordinary examples of partnerships here today, and you'll see them in the grant funded projects. Future Ready Oregon also made significant investments in new and innovative approaches to education and training that not only center these partnerships and collaboration, but also projects that approach workforce education and training differently by identifying barriers to equitable participation, program completion, and career advancement, and by providing job training participants the comprehensive supports and services they need to be successful. Future Ready Oregon invests in local workforce boards and the public workforce system. It's investing in community colleges and universities, as well as community-based organizations, other educational institutions, and workforce service providers, really ensuring that these partners are aligned and working collaboratively. You can go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Sarah Shin, who's going to talk a little bit more about the technology-specific portfolio for the Workforce Ready grants.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, perfect. Well, I'm Sarah Shin, she, her pronouns. I'm the Technology Workforce Ready Grant Administrator supporting our technology projects. It's really great to see you all today. I'm frequently at the in-person consortium meetings, so you may have seen me in the background doing various things. And see a lot of new faces as well. So nice to meet you. I'm going to share some background information, context of the grants program, including a map of the investments, and share some of the emerging themes and promising practices in the technology portfolio. Workforce Ready grants represent the largest investment in Future Ready Oregon. The HEC established this competitive grant program between March of 2022 and December 2024. And the HEC has awarded approximately $90 million in Workforce Ready grants, including approximately $13.7 million awarded to 21 technology projects. Funding was strategically implemented through 3 rounds of competitive funding. An initial round focused on capacity building and expanding the partners that comprise the workforce system. A second round of funding expanded innovative partnerships and approaches to education and training. And the third and final round of funding focused on sector-specific priorities informed by HEC's industry consortia. So as you may recall from the outcomes from the funding work group, these recommendations were focused on career advancement, as well as expanding education and training opportunities, focusing on transferable technology skills, and building awareness of technology careers and high-tech career exploration. So I'd like to draw your attention to your meeting materials, although I realize that your Zoom may be taking up your screen, so you may not be able to see those at the moment. But included is a table with descriptions of all of the technology-specific Workforce Ready grant-funded projects. So if you take a look at the map, this includes one technology-specific project that was funded in 2022 and completed in 2023, and then 25 projects that are ongoing. So there are 3 technology-specific projects that were awarded in 2023, 17 technology projects awarded in the most recent round of funding in 2024, and then there are 5 multi-sector projects, those are in the orange locator pins on the map, that were awarded in 2023 that include technology and healthcare and/or manufacturing. Each of the pins represents a different grant-funded project over the 3 rounds of funding, and the pins are the approximate physical address of the grantee organizations, but projects serve larger regions, whether it's a single county or multiple counties, or even statewide projects. Ronan, next slide, please. Thanks so much. So in the technology portfolio of Workforce Ready grants, I want to highlight a few of the themes that are emerging as promising practices and focus areas, and you can see some of the grantee organizations in those 4 buckets on the screen. So there are several grantees, particularly who are awarded in the sector-specific round, who are supporting technology workforce training and technology career exploration for youth and young adults. These programs include paid learning opportunities and hands-on internships, industry tours, and mobile programs and supports to reach rural and frontier communities and meet participants where they're physically located. These projects are based all around the state. So we have youth programs in a lot of the regions all over the state. So there are also projects that partner closely with industry and employers to ensure that participants are ready for success in their work-based learning experiences. Examples of these partnerships in action include Oregon Bioscience Association. They administer the Access Bio Registered Apprenticeship Program. And so their team works really closely with the employers who are hosting the on-the-job training portion of the apprenticeships. So their team meets regularly with the employers about apprentice onboarding partway through their apprenticeship, and they take the employer feedback, then incorporate that back into their apprentice onboarding process so that apprentices are more ready to hop into their on-the-job training. And so it makes it a more smooth experience for both the employers and the apprentices. And that's we've seen that as the case for a lot of the projects listed in that particular theme area. There are also several projects that highlight culturally responsive supports and programs. So these grantees have lived experience are co-located with their communities or partner with community-based organizations or CBOs who are responsive to their community needs. Well, one example of this is the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. They administer a drone workforce program where their recruitment efforts and supports are focused on tribal members. And the team works really closely with local industry and education partners to give participants paid training opportunities, wraparound supports such as mileage reimbursement, traveling to and from classes, support in passing their exams, equipment, and hands-on paid work experience. And then there are many projects that center industry recognized credentialing coupled with hands-on learning. And so like the projects below, as well as a lot of the other projects, really highlight both the credentialing piece plus this component of hands-on learning. One example is Eastern Oregon University. They have students working in virtual cybersecurity sandboxes. And at the same time, they're also providing hands-on IT internships with their IT department. And in fact, it's worth mentioning cybersecurity has emerged as a theme itself. So there's Eastern Oregon University's project. University of Oregon is also focusing on cybersecurity programming and curriculum in high schools. And then Portland State University's project partners with each of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes to support and deliver cybersecurity training and credentialing. So finally, I see a handful of grantees in attendance today. So I wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much, all of you, for the innovative work that you do. I mean, really everyone here on the call, but I do see the grantees who are involved in the technology projects. Thank you for all that you do to create and expand career pathways and opportunities for communities and for Oregonians around the state. Again, you can see all of the project descriptions for the Technology Workforce Ready grants in your meeting materials. Thanks so much. And Jennifer and I are happy to answer questions.
We have a few minutes for questions. If there are any questions about the emerging themes or any of the projects in particular.
Sarah, this is Venkat. I just wanted to call out the importance for hands-on learning, especially towards industry, because we're finding more and more, at least in the semiconductor industry, that we need people who've had exposure to problem solving with hands-on projects. So it's nice to see the grantees being awarded in money in that bucket. But also, we were in the Semiconductor Consortium meeting yesterday, and it turns out that the needs with the CHIPS Act money in Oregon are far greater than the number of people who are graduating from these institutions. And therefore, I think the enrollment for STEM students into these fields is critical for us to continue doing, particularly, math and science education and having that aptitude for engineering or technician degrees. So I just wanted to call out how important that is as well. So thank you. Just a comment, not a question.
Thanks, Venkat. All right, seeing no other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Shauna.
Thank you, Jen. Oh, we got a little echo in the room. Sarah and I are in the same room. So thank you for all of your comments. That was a great discussion. I'm so happy about that. And I'm grateful with Sarah to share all the examples that she did. We're going to take a break now for about 11 minutes, to be precise, and we'll meet back here at 10:30. And at that point, Ronan will talk about the House bill, and we're going to have some virtual breakout groups for small group discussion associated with that. So I'll see you back at 10:30. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's start the second part of our meeting here. I hope you had a chance to mark those dates on your calendar and take our little AI quiz. So for the next part of the meeting, Ronan Fitzsimons-Bray, an administrative specialist at the HEC, is working directly with the Oregon Employment Department and leading the effort for us on Future Ready Oregon House Bill 3306. He will review the statute and the work we've done to date. Feel free to raise your hand or use the chat if you have questions for Ronan. Following Ronan's presentation, we'll break into small virtual groups, and then we'll have small group discussions before coming back as a group. So Ronan, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Shauna. Let me share my screen here. Is this coming through for folks? One moment, please. Technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. Now it should be working. So hi, everyone. My name is Ronan Fitzsimons-Bray. As Shauna just said, I'm the administrative specialist on the Future Ready team. I'm also the public meetings administrator for each of our industry consortia. And today I'm just going to be presenting on some of the follow-up work we've been doing behind the scenes as it relates to building out a body of occupation and wage data related to the legislative charge of House Bill 3306. And I now realize that the slide deck has started from the beginning. So one moment, please, while I fast forward to my slides. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. So our objective for today is really to gather your input and feedback on how we package and present publicly available occupation and wage data that is already being published by the Employment Department. You will not be approving or voting on any of this today, but our hope is that using your feedback on this presentation by our next quarterly meeting, we can bring you a comprehensive list of all high-skill occupations in the technology sector to approve and for us to then publish on the HECS website in order to satisfy what we see as the minimum statutory requirements of this bill. So to that end, I've sort of broken this presentation out into 4 parts. First, I'm just going to be quickly reviewing the legislative requirements and walking us through some of those definitional decisions and data sources that we covered in our last quarterly meeting. Then we'll have a chance to take a very high-level overview of the technology sector and some definitional and methodological pieces that really set this sector apart from your compatriots in healthcare and manufacturing. And then we'll finally have a chance to get a look at, again, very high level, a snapshot of occupations within the sector, as well as a sample occupation profile as a way we could potentially do some deeper diving into this data. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and maybe a little bit of discussion before you head all into your breakout groups. So to review the legislative mandate, if you would cast your minds back to October of last year when we covered this initially or first brought this up. In 2023, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 3306, which amended the duties of each industry consortia to include a mandate to establish wage rate standards varied by locality for each skilled occupation within each sector. And once every 2 years, each industry consortium shall recalculate those wage rate standards using relevant economic and employment data made available by the Employment Department. And if you remember, I've bolded these 2 terms here, locality and skilled occupation. These really sort of set a baseline for how we approach implementation of this bill. At our last meeting, we sort of provided an overview of some possible and applicable terms. However, ultimately, to align this work with publicly available data from the Employment Department and their research methods, we've opted to use the following definitions. So when we say locality, we're going to be talking about local workforce development board regions. When we say skilled occupation, we're going to be talking about the Oregon Employment Department's high skill occupations definition. And I'm going to get into what that actually means a little later in this presentation. And then also, just as a quick reminder, industry sectors in this case are aligned, or the employment department, I should say, aligns their definition of industry sectors with that of the North American Industry Classification System, also known as NAICS, for their analysis of each industry. Although, as you're about to see, the technology sector is somewhat unique in that respect. Ooh, oops, sorry about that, folks. Don't know why that just dropped. Okay, I think this is back up. Okay. So moving on to an overview of the sector. So one of the things that makes defining technology and the technology sector somewhat difficult is that occupations in technology sort of appear across many industries. This is complicated by the fact that there is no NAICS defined technology sector. So in order to simplify and again, align this body of work with what the employment department is doing, we are going to be using their definition of core high-tech industries. In this case, an industry is classified as high-tech based on the percentage of jobs in that industry that are in STEM. The average STEM concentration of an industry in the US is around 6%, and industries with concentrations 5 times above and higher, that rate, are designated as core high-tech, whereas industries with concentrations 2.5 times above that level are designated as peripheral high-tech. So in terms of the actual industries that the employment department uses in their analysis of the technology sector, here we've got a list of all of the NAICS codes that they're used in that analysis. I'll just note the substantial overlap with the manufacturing sector. And this also might be a good point to just refresh folks, and this is going to be a gross overgeneralization, so forgive me, that the NAICS system essentially works by grouping establishments or businesses into these specific industries based on their economic activities, similarities in their production processes, and revenue data. And each one of these industries that you see in front of you right now can be actually broken out into further detail and further sort of sub-industries within these sectors. Core high-tech in Oregon makes up about 6.1% of total private employment and 12% of total payroll, and wages in this sector in these industries are twice the statewide average. Okay, before we get into looking at some actual occupation and wage data, I just wanted to do a quick refresh of some employment department definitions. So when we say a high demand occupation, that really means an occupation that has more than the median number of total openings statewide or for a particular area. And I believe that number in this case is around 620 openings. High wage occupations are occupations that pay more than the all occupation, all ownership median wage statewide or for a particular area. And I believe that number in this case is around $51,000, I think, a year. And then lastly, high skill occupations, which is really foundational to the statute and the statutory requirements of House Bill 3306. Occupations that have a typical education level needed for entry of post-secondary training or higher, or occupations with an apprenticeship as a typical on-the-job training level, or occupations typically needing related work experience or long-term on-the-job training for entry and post-secondary training. So as you're about to see a snapshot of all of high skill occupations in the sector, we thought it might be helpful to sort of contextualize how we selected this list. So we cross-referenced the employment department's list of STEM occupations with their list of high wage, high demand, and high skill occupations. The occupations we've selected require post-secondary education or training, either traditional four-year degrees, associate's degrees, apprenticeships, or some other form of work-based learning or internship opportunities. And the following occupation and wage data represents really just a snapshot of high-skill STEM occupations and should by no means be considered exhaustive. So on to the actual occupations themselves. There's about 14 here. Again, there's around 151 in the sector overall. Here we've just got some very basic data points such as current employment, projected employment, the percent change, and projected total openings. Just a really quick, another definitional refresh, and I know this is a lot, but total openings in this case are the number of change openings, also referred to as employment change and occupational projections, which are due to employment growth within an occupation itself, combined with replacement openings, which are openings caused by workers leaving an occupation. I'll also remind folks right now that these occupation titles you're seeing in front of you are not synonymous with job titles. And again, sorry about that. Oops. Again, an occupation title is really, and this is another gross overgeneralization, but a sort of loose amalgamation of a number of similar job titles based on the kinds of work performed, essentially. And so we know that this is certainly not the most accessible or necessarily understandable way to go about publishing this data. And so that's really where we're looking for your feedback on how we could sort of package this and present this to a broad audience. And here is one way that we might be able to do that. So here we've pulled together just a sample occupation profile for data scientists to really just give you an example, again, of how we might be able to do a deeper dive in some of this data and present this in a format that is slightly more understandable and accessible. So we've here just included a quick occupation description. This really is, again, just to reinforce that that these occupation titles are not synonymous with job titles, and provide some examples of what job titles in this occupation may look like, some basic education requirements, and then some industries of employment and hourly wage range. I'll note here for the industries of employment, as I mentioned earlier, you know, technology occupations are really spread out across a large number of industries, and that is certainly reflected here. And is also reflected in many of the other occupations in the sector. And then on the right here, we have a graph of hourly wage ranges ranging from the 10th percentile at the bottom to the 90th percentile at the top. This graph on the left represents the hourly wage ranges for this occupation in Oregon overall, whereas this graph on the left, or on the right, sorry, represents the wage ranges for this occupation within those industries that OED uses in their analysis of the technology sector specifically. Here's one way that we might be able to represent that wage variation by locality as called out in the statute. And this is really just at sort of the highest possible level, where we just have information on latest median hourly wage and employment in that occupation by county. And I will call out here that actually for this occupation, for whatever reason, we do not have median hourly wage rates for East Cascades and the Eastern Oregon regions. And there are other occupations for which there are certain regions we either do not have employment data or median hourly wages for due to a number of factors. Now, here's another way of representing that wage rate variation by locality. And this time we have, comprehensive wage percentiles ranging again from the 10th at the bottom to the 90th at the top for all of those regions that you just saw on the previous slide. And so this gives us maybe a little bit better of a detail of the sort of real wage variation by region across the state. Again, this is hourly, so not as comprehensive as annual wages might be. Now, moving on to what is our last slide. So before we go into breakout groups, really we want you to be thinking about the following questions. Are there methods of presentation or formatting that would make this data more accessible or easier to understand for a broad audience? And then I know at the last meeting, there was a lot of questions and comments and interest in sort of career pathway mapping and opportunity mapping using this data. And so to that end, beyond meeting the statutory requirements, how might this consortium use this data to advance our objectives? And again, our goal is that by the next quarterly meeting, we will be able to bring you a comprehensive list of all 151 high-skill occupations in the sector and associated wage data for you to review and approve. And again, I want to emphasize that this is really just with meeting those minimum statutory requirements in mind. And this does not preclude this consortium from using this data to advance your objectives in other ways. So with that, I'll open it up if there's any questions on any of the slides or the data itself before we go into our small groups.
Thank you, Ronan. I haven't seen any questions. Oh, there's one from Ashley. Okay. It looks like that's something you could probably, or we could address in the groups as well. So your task, we've assigned you each a virtual working group, a discussion group, which Emily will launch in just a moment here. Remember that this is publicly available data, available to anyone in this meeting on the Employment Department's site, but we're looking for ways to share this information that would be more compelling and more useful. And so we'd like your help with that and just your reaction to it overall as well. When you get into your groups, I'd appreciate it if you could assign a spokesperson for each of your groups. And then I'll ask you to report back at the end. And I'll give you, we'll say maybe 20 minutes for this activity. And thank you. Okay, I'm really excited. I walked around here at the office and made eye contact with the discussion group leaders. And so I'm really excited to hear about the discussion groups and anything that really stood out for you. If you designated a spokesperson for your group, would that person mind sharing out something that you learned or something that surprised you or something in general you'd like to share with the group?
I was in group 2 and was the designated person to share, so I'll be happy to start things off and be the first volunteer. But we kind of I was joined by Deb Mumhill as well as Corinne, and I apologize if I get your last name wrong, Corinne Bouchard. And we kind of, as we broke down the questions, we kind of felt like there was 3 key focal areas that we kind of kept coming back to that were themed throughout those questions. And I think the first one was when trying to synthesize this data and make it more accessible, was trying to acquire some sort of data around the cross-sector and the cross-cutting elements of these particular positions. You know, we discussed the fact that, and we know that Ronan mentioned this in this presentation, but that they don't really exist in just a standalone industry by themselves, that it's not just tech production or tech consumption that these jobs exist in. But when you look at the ideas of a computer user, support specialist, or software developers, or mechanical engineers, that those positions exist in pretty much every career field or career area. So is there a way for us to disseminate and pull out of the data and identify how these positions exist and are represented across all career fields versus just looking at it maybe through that silo of the tech industry, quote unquote, or tech production? We also talked about and kind of thought that it would be important. This is something that would be harder to represent from a statistical data standpoint, but acknowledgement of how much of these particular skills and this particular technical knowledge contributes to the economy in a way that we don't really have the ability to measure from a data standpoint. We often hear from representatives at the Oregon Department of Employment that we don't really have a way to track independent economic contribution, you know, the quote unquote gig economy. And so is there a way for us to identify that there is a percentage of our economic contribution that comes from individuals with these skill sets and that have this technical training, but don't fall particularly into a category that we have the ability to track at our at our state level at the moment. And then one thing, and I think there was a lot of representation from the education side in our group. So I think we leaned a little bit towards looking at the question, asking about how some of this data and information can be used outside of just the legislative language that's intended for it. But I know within the world of education, especially in career and technical education, we use high demand, high wage, high skill data to help make regional decisions to determine how to develop educational programs that will support these specific career areas. And so this data can be leveraged in many ways to kind of help leadership in the education level, look at developing stronger pathways regionally that can start as early as the K-12 level and have a clear trajectory towards a post-secondary partner with the opportunity for community college and university level advancement that ties into the ability to target degrees and credentials that would help expand employment in these areas. And so, like I said, I might be a little biased as someone who works at ODE specifically in the CTE sector, but I know that when we sit down with administrators and directors at the ESD level, this is the data that we really disseminate to say, is this program really something that contributes to this region, to this state, and it's going to help fill the need that we have from a workforce development standpoint. And we're giving kids an authentic opportunity where there is a demand and a need. And so this is something that could have a lot of power in creating that pathway and kind of creating a real symmetry of our pathway from education to workforce. That I think if the accuracy of it and the consumability of it can really help contribute from that standpoint with our educational leaders and industry input as well. And if anybody from my group wants to jump in, if you feel like there was anything I maybe didn't articulate as well or missed, feel free, please, to contribute.
You did great, Jeff. The only two things I would just kind of come back, say yes, and the industry cluster credentialing. If there's any way that Jason or the people over at the Department of Employment could kind of do industry cluster sectoring across these. So what is a software developer? And Jeff talked about this in a hospital, in a school system, what that looks like across some clusters. And then what he was speaking about at the end there is just understanding the mapping, the credential mapping that I know this group has talked about previously, but really what a need for those 32 jobs, data scientist jobs in Eastern Oregon. What can they do regionally at, Treasure Valley Community College? And then can they go to Eastern Oregon University to receive those credentials, or do they have to then make plans to be at U of O, OSU, PSU? So mapping those as well would be great. But great job, Jeff. Thanks for summarizing.
Thank you, Jeff and Deb. I know these are conversations we have a lot, especially the career credentialing mapping. Like as a consortium, we talk about this frequently. So I appreciate your comments. Is there another group that would like to share?
I can go next.
Okay, thank you, Venkat.
So my group had Nick facilitating the discussion with Kyle and Wade. And so we talked a lot about the goals of, what do we want from this data, in terms of presenting it in a better way. Who are we trying to reach? Who is our audience? And we identified three broad buckets. One was to get more students and job seekers interested in education opportunities or STEM opportunities. And then the second one was having this breakdown of data is going to be useful for policymakers and advancing our consortia objectives. And then the third one was for academic institutions in terms of teacher development and program and curriculum planning in partnership with industry and their current needs. So the data organization, when we talked about, we looked at the data and the proposed breakdown of the data. Some of the themes that came out were, other than percentages, we should show the fastest growing occupations. And secondly, if there was a way to describe the education pathway and map that with the wage data. So for example, if somebody is just getting a high school diploma, what kind of wages can they expect versus getting a degree, a bachelor's degree or a master's degree? How does that wage data change according to the pathway, and also break it down per region? And then the third thing was to be consistent with the data itself, because some places use medians, the other use mean. So we should be consistent with that data. And the other question that I had looking at the table, and I think I brought that up earlier too with you, Shauna, was that the software development was the row with the largest number of projected gains. And so that data seemed very optimistic to me, given current AI trends. And the reason I say that is because computers understand and can be programmed using natural language these days. So the developing software using AI as a co-pilot is a lot more desirable to industry than a traditional computer science or a software development career. So we should dig into that data a little bit more to understand if the projection is correct, given the recent tech layoffs in the computer science field. And finally, the question came up about where to disseminate this kind of information or the data once we curate it. And the answer led to STEM hubs and school districts and career placement offices and counseling offices at our academic institutions, and then the local workforce boards through the WTDB. That would be a good option as well. So Nick, Kyle, and Wade, if I missed anything, let me know, but that's the summary.
Thank you, Venkat. We had the same discussion in the manufacturing meeting a couple of weeks ago, and one of the points that came up more than once in that was having the information consumable for parents and students who are trying to decide, what to do after high school, and presenting it in really a way that they could understand and make choices for their students. So I appreciate your comment, and it's consistent with what we heard a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Do we have another group? I know I saw a hand up and then it went down. So, Kevin, thank you.
I didn't want Venkat to think I already had a question prior to him even saying anything. So, so I was in a group with Cassie, Heather, Faye, and Janelle, and we didn't necessarily focus in on a particular persona. So for instance, employers or legislators, or even a high school student who's trying to think about what to do for a career. So keeping it a little less specific at the moment. The things that we talked about for the representation of the data is, for instance, and Venkat, I think you just hit on this, of making sure it's very clear what the data actually does or doesn't mean. So as numbers are represented, that we like the representation on the map, but making sure it's very clear as to when it says 32, what does 32 actually mean? Another thing in some of the representation of trying to look at what does someone in a data scientist role, as the example that we have here, how do someone in that role typically perceive or think of the data being shown? Do they really think of themselves as hourly rates versus salaried versus, so an annualized versus hourly? So trying to think about it, of what flexibility we have there to make it more oriented to people in those roles. And then just because this is something I care deeply about, is making sure however we represent the data, since it'll be on a public website, is going to be digitally accessible. So we're keeping away from web controls and other things that are basically going to run afoul of obviously various guidelines, but more importantly, making it truly accessible for the fact that it is going to be available for so many. As we talked about how we're using it right now, again, back to the map and some of the others, it's very meaningful to us to see the regional discrepancies, both in numbers of positions as well as pay scale, understanding even how that aligns to general differences would maybe be helpful as well. So Eastern Oregon, we recognize, has a smaller population. So should we see those discrepancies? Should we not? And then seeing the trends of our work. I believe it was Heather who used the word longitudinal. So I promised I would use that when reported out. So trying to see, great, over time, how is this changing as opposed to, as the data is represented right now, more of a snapshot in time, I think is something that would be very helpful. And then from an additional data, I think a lot of people have hit on this in previous meetings, and I've already heard it in a couple. For instance, Jeff mentioned this of just simply how we are representing the different pathways, and that's pathways across these different occupations, but even within the occupations to understand as a data scientist, is that encapsulating entry through vice president of data scientist? Like what kind of titles would be encapsulated in that so people can actually have a better and more concrete understanding of what those are. And at the same time, very importantly, we see what the higher degrees are necessary for the data scientists. What would someone who's that high school sophomore who's thinking about this, what should they already be doing to prepare themselves for a career as a data scientist at the high school level in order to actually be a good fit, whether that after a post-secondary degree or frankly, even after high school? Think that's what we covered, but I'll wait for the team. I told everyone they can just say, that's not what we said. So we'll see if anyone brings that up.
They're not disputing you, so you must have done a great job summarizing it. I appreciate your point about accessibility too, because a lot of times, I speak for myself, visual graphics, and infographics and things like that, and those aren't always as accessible. So I appreciate your point. I think we have one more group that hasn't reported.
The joy of going best for last here. No, I'm just kidding. And it's interesting right there. There's a lot of consistency in some of the themes. The first question we had was, right, how do we make this data more accessible to the reader? And our conversations kind of focused on, is there a way to talk more about skills and not jobs? Because a title, it's hard sometimes to understand clearly what does that mean, but a movement to the skills might be helpful in both demonstrating what that job actually is like, but give folks better clarity. Another thing we talked about is the possibility of being able to do some comparison, and two of the things came up around like being able, how these jobs stack up by region with other jobs, right? Trying to show some significance of the high wage, high pay, and possibly adding a cost of living index, excuse me, as a way to kind of better understand the data. We had the advantage of having Amy in our team. So my team was Brooke, Amy, Abby, and Jeff Hampton. So she was able to give us a little bit more context on the data that was used, which was very helpful. The last thing was on this is also, depending on the use of it, is making sure that the language doesn't set up barriers. And I had shared the example, like within the semiconductor industry, employers were saying they would talk to people who would think they didn't have the super high-tech skills, therefore they could never work for a semiconductor industry, not understanding what, again, back to those skills actually were needed. And so trying to make sure that there's a way to look at those aptitudes as opposed to titles. The other question we had was, how could we use this beyond, how could the consortium use this? And some of the conversation was around how we align this with some industry standards like CompTIA. And does this legislation help define our universe that we're focused on or not? And that's something that the consortium would need to decide, but that could be a use for it. And then how are we really engaging employers in this? This is both understanding, right, which of those areas are highest demand, highest need, most critical to them, with a mind of also not just focusing on kind of limited by the IT, but on the growth that's needed. And Abdi brought up a good point. It might be helpful for us, an additional layer is to add where the training happens. because there quite possibly could be some of this training happening by the employers. And so mapping out what's happening on the job, what's happening at community colleges, high schools, right? Where does that level of training happen? Which again, I think we already heard, but that could be helpful in figuring out how then we build out all those positions. So did I miss anything, guys?
Another excellent summary. No groups adding anything in, so thank you. I appreciate it. Before, I think as long as no one has any more comments, I think we're ready to move to our last agenda item. Ronan, would you pull up the working group slide deck, please? Well, the slide, not the slide deck. Thank you. So the last agenda item we have today is I want to introduce a proposal for advancing our consortium's work between quarterly meetings. I've worked with the ELT to develop a framework for working groups that will allow us to make continuous progress. And we're proposing 2 tracks. One is accelerating career credential pathways, and the other is reducing barriers. And we have some proposed topics here on the slide for you to look at. Some of these groups, like you can see on the lower part of the slide, will draw on subject matter expertise outside of the consortium necessarily, and other topics we could keep within the consortium. So it's sort of a hybrid approach. Healthcare has proposed working groups focused on behavioral health and nursing credential pathways, and manufacturing is currently looking more broadly at accelerating career and credential pathways and reducing barriers. For me, when I started looking at the working groups with Skip and Lisa and Venkat, there's a world of possibility out there. There's so much work to do, and it's for me the challenge was narrowing it. And so this is a first attempt at narrowing some of the topics that I've heard when listening for my short period of time to you, reviewing previous conversations and talking with Skip, Lisa, and Venkat. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to kind of lead a discussion of this, and really we welcome your comments. So Lisa, do you want to take it?
I'm happy to, and asking for grace with this group because Skip was supposed to be leading this part of it. And so you know how when you're part of the team but not delegated something, you listen, but you don't like super listen and take notes. So I'm asking Shauna to please jump in case there's pieces I forget. So at this point, I'd like to actually have kind of a conversation of what your reaction is to these groups and kind of the structure. This was our attempt based on conversations that have happened over the last year and a half, also the legislation. But yeah, since you're part of the consortium, we need your input. The first part with the accelerating the pathways and reducing barriers, that is out of the kind of authorizing legislation. And our proposal is right, that level or kind of the top tier of those areas would be led by members, and membership would be our consortium folks, because we have that shared body of knowledge to know the conversations and where we've worked. But then under that, we could identify subcommittees that include consortium members, all of you, but we could also have the ability to bring in some subject matter experts in the various areas. It does extend it a bit, but I think it also would give us a chance to collect more information. And the 5 areas you see here, reskilling and assisting with military transitions, IA in the workforce, and aligning curriculum with sector needs, that will fall under the pathways kind of area. And then under reducing barriers, we'd be looking at preparing for an aging tech workforce and increasing diversity. So I'm gonna pause and I'd love to get folks' reactions if this looks good. We're missing something. Yeah. Can you live with this?
This is Brooke. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm sorry. I like the structure. We use a similar structure for the Oregon Clean Energy Workforce Coalition, and it's a really effective tool. The one thing that I think would be really good is to make sure that we're really clear about what each of these subcommittees are working on and kind of what their area of focus is, so that there's not unintentional duplication of efforts, but also that folks really know like where to plug in and then how that ties into our larger strategy around advancing this work.
Thank you for that, Brooke. I realized there is a little detail I forgot to share. Or Shauna, were you just gonna? I saw you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So within the first one, the reskilling and assisting military transitions, the thought here was, how do we help reskill military impacted by this industry and other reskilling efforts around these opportunities? And the questions being kind of, what are the opportunities for credit for prior learning? Specifically like in cybersecurity, program management, aviation, logistics, that could nicely transition from military service into civil. Just to note, there is currently a bill around credit for prior learning for veterans, so this might align nicely. And there are some examples of institutions that have done this, so it wouldn't be a complete start from scratch. The AI and the tech workforce, kind of the exploration would be around looking at how IA will impact our workforce, specifically around which occupations are most likely to be impacted, what regions, which communities, what kind of retraining is going to be needed, and what new roles are going to emerge. And with that, what existing occupations are most easily, I'll say pivotable, I'm not sure that's a word, but most likely able to pivot into this new area. The third one around aligning curriculum, I think this kind of gets to one of the conversations we were talking about, is aligning education, post-secondary and secondary, post-secondary, really to meet those industry needs. And also identifying what are some of the barriers we have in place, or I would even say redundancy. Could be placing interns, it could be gaps we have in training. There are some successful models that this group could look at, and like learn and earn, internships, work study programs, apprentices. Also, what are the micro-credentials that would enable a more rapid skill acquisition for these occupations? And then kind of to that CompTIA comment, what credentials are widely accepted by employers and how do they dovetail with existing programs? On the preparing the aging workforce, we can look at the trends and identify where those gaps in the tech area are gonna emerge, and where do we have the retirement I can't find the word, right, where there's a lot of retirements happening as a way to kind of prioritize what we're looking at. And also, what are some ways we can look at models of cross-generational team structures or mentorship building to help prepare the incoming workforce? Also, are there flexible work options or ways to retain older workers to encourage them to remain in the workforce longer? And what can we learn from other states? And then the last area, some of the topics could be, right, we've heard a lot about different groups that are reaching out and building entry points into the tech industry. How do we take some of those key challenges, like underrepresentation of women, underrepresentation of Black, Hispanic workers, and also the ages, right? The average age of the workforce is 30s to 40s. And so how are we appealing and attracting younger folks? Also related to attraction, there's also the conversation around how do we retain them? It doesn't do us any good to create a surge within an industry and then lose them to something else and have the same problem happening. And then there are some successful programs and models in Oregon, like Breakthrough Tech, from other areas. I think Breakthrough Tech is New York, but we might be able to look at and see how we could increase placements and retention. Shauna, did I miss anything?
You did not. Does anyone have any thoughts, just a response to this, as this seems right, or this, Melissa had a very good comment in the chat that I've responded to, or were you thinking of taking this another direction? We'd like to stand these up so we can start moving forward. So I'm really looking to you for your feedback. And following this meeting, I'll have a communication and try to meet with some of you to gather that feedback so we can get a stronger direction forward. Melissa, you have your hand up?
Yes, I did have my hand up. So when I've worked on these types of things in the past, it's really important to try to derive clarity with regard to the problem statements that are being addressed and minimize the degree of overlap or potential overlap. And then there's going to be some places where you're going to have overlap just by the necessity of the problem statement, and then really figuring out, making sure you have the right parties in both conversations. So for example, AI and the Oregon Tech workforce and aligning curriculum to rapidly changing tech needs. Both of those, in my opinion, both of those group structures would require a higher ed and community college representation to be able to, help assemble what should be done in terms of a set of recommendations. Having the same entities in both, probably not like PSU representation, both probably not the right approach, right? So how do you say, okay, you are not representing just your community college, you are representing the voices of all community colleges in this work group, or you two folks are representing the voices of higher ed and engineering curricula across the state, et cetera, and really making sure that the roles and responsibilities for these work groups, where there is matrixed needs, is clearly articulated.
That's good feedback. I appreciate it. I don't think our intention is to go forward with all of 5 of these. This would be much too big a bite to take right at this point, but to narrow these. And I think your feedback on both of those topics is excellent.
Right. Just a quick point here. I agree with Melissa that the overlap with the working groups is quite significant. In fact, if I was looking at the AI, the Oregon Tech, and then I look at aligning curriculum, it just seems like those two could be merged.
Yeah, Kyle just put the same comment in the chat. So that's excellent feedback and I appreciate it. Yeah. So there's a consensus on that.
If they're merged, or the AI workforce is not about higher ed. It's about, workforce reach skilling for disrupted industries that doesn't have to do with going to school. Like you would need to be really clear about how do you bifurcate those, or else it's just going to be coloring on top of each other all over the place.
Yeah. For me, when I look at the AI and the Oregon Tech workforce topic, I think about what Venkat said when we were talking about software developers earlier and the projections for those roles. Like that data from the employment department may be lagging, and there may be a significant impact to that, in the workforce, to that people in those roles. So that would be one of the things that we could look at within that topic area. Do we have any other comments? Yeah, Wade's comment, I'm not sure how to respond to, are we looking at the federal funding landscape? So,
Yeah, it just seems like there's some predictable problems on the horizon. I don't know if these work groups or be something like some contingency planning around that. Like it's pretty predictable. And then it's more of a focus than topic issue. It's just to make sure that, you know, it's great to be like what's today, but it's like that, like, well, now software developers are a disrupted profession. Like, how can we be getting ahead? It's hard for the speed of government to react to today's problem a little bit. So what are the future problems? What are the future? That would just be in the shaping of the committee work. It's that maybe you can compose the committees to do things in a short time frame that make it responsive. But if you can't do that, then maybe steering it into a longer window of how am I getting a sixth grader ready for a job that's way down there. It's harder, but I don't think it's inconsistent with. So that's just my thoughts. But being intentional around contingency, it seems like it's not going to help to not talk about and potential for state economic forecasts kind of stuff.
And thinking about a sixth grader is definitely not out of the question, especially for some of the careers that require a lot of math or technical skills. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to ask Ronan to bring up the last slide. Okay. It's taking a minute to load, at least from my end. Here it comes. So our next meeting will be somewhere in the Portland-Salem metro. It'll be in person, which I'm looking forward to. That's on May 13th. So mark your calendars if you haven't. In that meeting, we'll continue to look at the occupational data, launching off of the working group discussions we've had today. Next one. And we'll have updates on the legislative session at the next meeting too. And that should be interesting. We'll be well into it then. I hope that we can stand up some working groups before then and we'll have some direction and things in place. And then last one, Ronan. And then I hope that we'll have some new consortium members join. We've had a couple of leave for retirement. And so I hope to bring in a couple to replace them. If you have no other questions, I will be in touch. I want to hear from all of you in any way, like a meeting, a phone call, email, anything like that, to hear your thoughts on this meeting, on the working group topics, and on anything else. So you can look for that coming from me in the near term. Lisa, Venkat, do you have any closing comments?
No, thank you all for coming and look forward to the next meeting and figuring out the working groups and presenting the data in a form that's readable and useful to everybody that we identified.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Stay dry.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you all for attending today.